scripture reading for today will be from Proverbs 23, verse 26. Again, that is Proverbs chapter 23, verse 26. And it reads, "Give to me your heart, my son, and let your eyes delight in my ways."
So that's what the bottom half of your faces look like. It's been a while since I've seen all of those. I have to talk to Charles and Jim about maybe like reinstating the mask mandate or something. No, I'm kidding. No one laughed at that. My son, I'm going to get home. My son's going to go, "You're so mean, Dad." It is good to see everyone. There's one quick announcement that did not get made because I didn't get a chance to give it to Mike, and that is that Lori is going to be on the road as well this week, and she's going to be traveling, and so I want to keep Lori in prayer. That we always take this for granted when people go out of town, and we really do covet prayers when we're on the road and to make it back safely. And so we want to remember Lori as well, who will be traveling. And then this week we'll be traveling down to Southern California with Galen and Sally as well. I received a really kind of a humorous message or text from a good friend of mine this week, and it's about Father's Day and just different things that dads say. And I thought that it would be, it'd be kind of a nice thing to do this morning. It's called "How Dad Are You?" And of course, we are probably guilty of so many of these, being dads, with what our children hear us say. For instance, some things that we say is, "Well, guess it's free then," when a cashier has trouble scanning an item, and they laugh about as much as you are right about now. So they think about it's that funny. Another one is, "I found it," after pointing to a stud finder at your own chest. And "Looks like we'll have to amputate," when a kid has a minor injury. Another one is, "Well, did you fall in?" when a child takes too long in the bathroom. Another one is, "Well, can you do mine next?" when seeing a neighbor washing their car. I know this next one, I've told my son this a couple of times. "Don't spend it all in one place," after giving them a ridiculously small amount of money. And there are two that kind of go together. And I'm sure many of the dads have said this. "Well, when I was your age," and and that's connected to, "Well, we had it so much worse at your age," and we just go into detail about how we had to walk uphill both ways in the snow, right? Barefoot, and just as worse as it can possibly be. When we're traveling, we look at traffic going the other way, going the other side of the road. "Well, glad we're not going that way." And when the door is left open, how many of us said, "Well, I'm not paying to heat the whole neighborhood"? And then there's the complaints that come. People don't know how to drive in this town. For every town that you enter, except your own. After declining additional warranty protection, you say something like, "Well, that's how they just get you." And after tying something down, you say something like, "Well, that's not going anywhere." And we know that that's not always the case. And then there's the dad jokes. And I promised my son I would not tell any of the dad jokes this morning for fear of what it could do to his social life at this congregation. But we do say some things, as parents, as dads, and even as moms, that children do remember. And they remember some of the absurd things that we do say. But as much as the absurd things that they remember us saying, there are things that they remember that are much more significant. There are things that they're going to take with them. There are things that they're going to remember us doing and remember us saying, and they're going to carry those for life. And it's going to mean something to them. Children, for instance, are going to remember the love that you showed. In fact, if you look at Ephesians chapter 6, beginning in verse 4, and the first part of this verse in particular, Paul writes right here some of the best parenting advice that I think we could ever receive from an apostle. He says fathers, and he addresses this to fathers. Do not provoke your children to wrath. That is such an important thing right there, because this, when you look at that word wrath, the translation of that word is actually to move to anger or to move to resentment. And there is not a worse thing that can be done for a child is to move them or say anything that will cause them to resent you. This is abusive right here. To have a father that moves their child so much, or that angers them or upsets them or deals with them in such a way that their children are going to resent them. I can't think of a worse position to be in for a father than to have a child resent them. And so you look at this and just think, well, what can I do to prevent this from happening? And for some, what can I do to stop this from happening? Because we do catch ourselves sometime. We certainly don't want to move our children in that direction. But you think of everything that children are going to remember. They're not going to, that in your own home. Children aren't going to remember the meals and all of the, just whatever they eat for dinner or for breakfast or whatever the case might be. They're not going to remember all the clothes, even though we might not be as fashionable or be, with the trends that might be current. And, I dress my child in 80s clothes if I could do that. And he reminds me all the time that I can't do that because those aren't cool anymore. Not that they ever were to him, but they're not going to remember the clothes. And they're not going to remember all of the gifts that were provided or given to them. Even though they might like it and enjoy it for a while, there's, years from now, they're likely not going to remember everything that they get. And you think of how significant that is, because all of these things are the material things having to do with your relationship with them. They're the carnal things that are not going to stick around in their memory. But there are things that they will remember, and it's far superior to any material thing that we could ever give to them. They will remember the time that you invested in them, talking to them. They're going to remember those times that you sit down with them. And when they needed to talk to someone, that you were there, and you were there to listen, and you were there to give them advice, and you're there to hear all of the problems or the challenges that might arise with them. They're going to remember that. They're going to remember playing with them and the time that you actually sat down and took with them, because they are that important to you. Every child longs to be seen as being important to their parents, and they deserve to be in that position. They're going to remember how you treated them and how you treated their mother, your wife. They're going to remember if you yelled at them. They're going to remember if you were stern. They're going to remember also, though, that you ultimately had their best interest and that you really did care about them. They're going to see that. And they are going to remember that from years to come. They're going to remember you trying. Because we know that life is not always easy, and we know that there are people sometimes that we have to deal with, and we take that home from maybe a job or school or work or whatever the case might be, and it can be a difficult thing to leave your job at the door. But they are going to remember you trying and doing your best to be the best parent that you possibly can be. The discipline is there. And children don't always like that discipline. But when they think back on it, how grateful they are when the right kind of discipline was shown. And they can see what we do to try to just make the home as positive an environment, as safe environment, and one where communication is so important, and that it's open, and that they feel like they can talk to you about anything. That they don't have to go to their friends, that they don't have to go to someone else, even at the congregation. They don't have to go to a teacher. They don't have to go to an elder or a preacher, but that they trust you and they care about you and know that what you're going to talk to them about is going to be sound because you have a legitimate care for them. Children are also going to remember the lessons that you taught. You think of just all the things that we do try to teach our children. And there's different principles that probably take priority more than others. There are different morals that we try to instill. Certain ways that we try to teach them when they talk to other people. The honesty and always being careful to consider other people first. And these are lessons that are so important for a child. And it's important for us, and especially being spiritually minded, to have their spiritual welfare in mind as well. We want children to grow up and to serve God in a way that is so significant for their life. You want a child to become a spiritual leader, they need to see you as one. And it's such an important example, and it's an important lesson, an imperative lesson, if you want your child to grow up and be a spiritual leader. And I'm not talking about one that usurps authority in worship service, because there are great spiritual leaders that people look to, and they look up to them, and they trust them. They're great spiritual leaders that my son, I know, looks up to. And how interesting this is when Solomon tells his son something. If you turn to Proverbs chapter 23, and it was read this morning, but in verse 26, and I'm going to be getting to the rest of this because I think that Solomon, the advice that Solomon gives his son that we're going to be looking at is one of the greatest life lessons, one of the greatest things I think that every parent can bestow on their child. But in verse 26, one of the things he says right here is, let your eyes observe my ways. That's so important in teaching lesson to your children, to not just say something and do it. But I've seen parents that say, don't do as I do, do as I say, and they don't show anything to go along that would correspond to that, or that would validate a statement like that. And it's so, you want to teach your child the greatest lessons in their lives. You live it yourself and make sure that they can see it, so that when you do start talking about it, when you do try to install it into them, they're going to understand it. Let your eyes observe my ways. This involves teaching the triumphs in life as well as how to work through the failures in life. Because we know that there are times that we're going to fall short. And there are times that our children are going to fall short. And they're going to wonder what to do and how to handle it. And it has been so mishandled by so many ways that we see publicly. But when we can show them how to work through a situation, and how to when they come up, when there is something that they fall short in, or that something that might challenge them, something that might make them question their self-esteem, to know how to get through that is everything for them. But teach them how to get through those. And teach them about, like I said, the triumphs. What's going to help them to triumph in this life. Kids need parents to be teachers and their examples. In fact, I've often said the greatest youth minister that you could ever have for your child is a mom and dad. Don't make the church raise your child. Don't make your school teachers raise your children or anyone else. We have a responsibility, and our children will look to us before anyone else. When you look at Ephesians 6:4, the latter part of that verse, it's one of the greatest lessons that can be taught. Bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. That's where we're going to succeed. You think there is not going to be anything wrong, nothing questionable, nothing to worry about when you teach a child to love God. Because when they can love God and they can put God first in everything, and every single decision that they make and everything that they do, they have God in mind when they make that decision, they are going to succeed because they're doing it for Him, and they know that when He's with them, And when they have parents that love them enough to want them to have God in their lives, to want them to live by the Scriptures, to want them to succeed and get to heaven and help them grow from a young age. It's great to see that, it's so great to see them mature spiritually with that. I love seeing young children get excited about becoming and already start questioning about being Bible teachers and elders and preachers. What a great thing that is, to bring them up from that young age to want to be spiritual leaders in the church. I've seen some that have, all they hear is complaining. They hear complaining about leadership. They hear complaining about being teachers. They hear all the bad things about, how these children are misbehaving, or how people in the congregation just, constant whining and complaining and so forth, and they don't get any of what they need. But when children can see from a young age everything good and how important it is and how great it is to want to be a spiritual leader in the church, we need to be fathers to our children, not just of our children, because they're going to remember that. They're going to remember how important it was to us, and that's going to reflect greatly on how important it is to them. And finally, children are going to remember the life that you led. Turn back over to Proverbs 13. I read this, and when, in looking at this lesson, and there's so many ways we can go, obviously, with, looking at fathers in the Bible and the lessons, the great lessons that have been taught by fathers in the Bible, the great examples, the great illustrations, that this one really struck me. And it struck me because of the way that Solomon worded this. If you can, just imagine, here's Solomon writing, everything that happened to Solomon. All of the things that, being counted as the most wise individual of his time, but falling the way that he fell with his relationships and going through what he did. And here's Solomon, just as his father David, remember, David sat Solomon down at the end of his life and gave him this great advice and told him just what it means to be strong and to follow God. And here's Solomon taking that same thing, and now at the just during the Proverbs that he writes, I can just see him with his son in mind, addressing his child, and with everything that happened. And this is why it hits so deeply for me, just the way he words this. In verse 26 of chapter 23, he says, "My son, give me your heart." That strikes an intimate note, a chord that I can't even begin to explain. Because I think there have been times where every father has had that same thought, even if you didn't verbalize it this way. My son, give me your heart, because I have something to tell you. And let your eyes observe my ways. And listen to what he tells him right here. And when you understand the life that Solomon led, this is so profound in the way we deal with our children. He says, "For a harlot is a deep pit, and a seductress is a narrow well. And she also lies in wait as for a victim and increases the unfaithful among men." Solomon tells his child, give me your heart. And he opens up about his mistakes. That just, that hits so deep with me. He gives advice to one of his sons, and he warns him of choosing a harlot. And when you consider all of the strange women, and we read about this during Solomon's life, that he was with all of these strange, or these unauthorized women, these relationships that should never have happened. And he sits and he tells his son, don't ever do what I did. He urges his son to do the same thing. And it's a great reminder that parents cannot be afraid to acknowledge their mistakes to their children. We are going to make mistakes. We're going to mess up. And we're going to do things that we regret. We're going to do things we wish we had not done. And our children, if they observe it or get to know us and know the things that we did, they're going to remember that. But even more, they're going to remember how we handled them. And it's going to mean something to them. It's going to affect them. Be honest with your children. We owe it to them. That is what a father needs to do. Show your child that you're not perfect. Show your child that it's okay to need to be corrected. Show them that it's okay to need to repent. Show them that it's okay. Because we know we're not perfect. And we try to put on this face, don't we? We try to put on, we try to be the superhero to our children. And to some extent, they're going to look at us that way. You're going to be a hero to your child. They're going to look at you, whether you like it or not, and they're going to look up to you, and they're going to want to be like Dad. So what are you going to do? What are you going to show them? It's unfortunate because I know that there are fathers who see today as regret for not being that role model. They see everyone wishing the dads, happy Father's Day, and they're so grateful, and they see all the happy families, and they see the relationships that are built up with fathers, and I've seen fathers, and I've talked to fathers that look at today as regret, knowing they didn't do all of those things, that they weren't that role model, that they did overreact on certain things, that they did make bad decisions, the way that Solomon made poor decisions in his life. But having said that, let me encourage you, if I could, to let today be the day that you work to change that. Because as much as children see you mess up, and as much as children see you regret not doing certain things, they're also going to remember turning that corner and being the dad that they want and that they need. Whether good or bad, we're going to be remembered. And we're likely going to be emulated. Give them something. Give them a life that is going to show them how to do that and how to be. So when they get to that age, that they can be the father that they wanted. The father that you want to be to them. They are going to perceive and they're going to remember whether your faith and your spiritual life is legitimate, that it's genuine. Think about this. When your relationship with Christ is firm, and it is the most important relationship that you will ever have with anyone in your life, so will your relationship be with your child. You're going to have that much stronger of that relationship with them when you can have it with Christ first. If you have need or to answer the invitation, I want to urge you this morning, don't just not do anything. Don't be afraid to not answer it because you're afraid of what your children or anyone else might think. Don't ignore a chance to correct something if it needs to be corrected. Don't ignore a chance to correct your life, to make good decisions, to make this the day that you decide to change, to make this the day that you're going to move forward and show your children, show your families that how important it is to love God first and to illustrate to your children that they can correct their lives. What an important lesson we learn from Solomon and what advice we get from the Apostle Paul. But if you do have that need this morning, please make sure you answer this invitation as we stand and sing.